entire financial portfolio of Queen Camilla's daughter was frozen, and the power dynamic at the absolute top of the British monarchy was altered forever. This was not a tragic misunderstanding, nor was it a family dispute settled over afternoon tea. It was a cold, calculated, military-style execution orchestrated by Prince William. In a single, ruthless sequence of moves, William cornered his own father, backed King Charles into a constitutional dead end, dismantled Queen Camilla's private financial networks, and weaponized the highest courts in the land to reclaim his mother's stolen legacy. And yet, when the High Court audit finally concluded, the recovery of those two missing items revealed something far more terrifying: a secret, multi-million-dollar offshore paper trail leading straight across the Atlantic, pointing directly toward a shadow operation that the royal household was utterly powerless to stop. To understand the sheer velocity with which William struck, you have to go back to a quiet room inside Kensington Palace just weeks before the Wiltshire raid. It arrived without fanfare, buried inside routine commercial correspondence. An administrative staff member was scanning through incoming auction documentation from Sotheby's when a set of standard high-resolution catalog photos flashed onto the screen. The images were prepared for a private appraisal, logged under a civilian name, flagged for nothing in particular. To an untrained eye, they were simply two stunning pieces of anonymous vintage jewelry, a rare black diamond pendant suspended on an intricate chain, and a geometric sapphire bracelet crafted with undeniable 20th century elegance. The staff member did not file the document away. They did not issue a routine appraisal reply. They froze. Those pieces were not anonymous. They had been photographed around the neck and wrist of Princess Diana in the mid-1990s. They existed in classified palace registries, tied to a legacy that defined modern British history. Crucially, they were pieces that had vanished from public view more than 2 decades ago, items that were never, under any circumstances, supposed to appear in a commercial auction catalog. The catalog entry was logged under the name of Laura Lopes, Queen Camilla's civilian daughter. By submitting them under a private name outside the Crown Estate Registry, the legal mechanism was simple. It would quietly establish a record of civilian ownership, strip away the royal provenance, and allow the items to be liquidated into private international collections where they could never be recovered. When the photograph was brought directly to Prince William, he didn't raise his voice. He didn't call his father, he didn't reach out to Camilla's household, and he didn't offer a graceful, quiet exit. Instead, William placed a direct call to Farrer and Company, the elite law firm that handles the royal family's most lethal legal matters. The instruction was not to investigate, it was to execute. William recognized instantly what Camilla's circle was attempting to do. It was a silent, administrative absorption of his mother's personal wealth, and he had already laid the trap to destroy it. What Camilla's household did not realize was that William had already initiated the first phase of this war weeks before the Sotheby's catalog ever surfaced. In early May, William executed a financial maneuver that sent shockwaves through the financial administrators of the royal estates. In a single, sweeping movement, he liquidated 20% of the Duchy of Cornwall's commercial real estate portfolio, pulling roughly £500 million directly out of active markets. On paper, the official statement was smooth and public relations friendly, citing local housing initiatives, green development, and community reinvestment. But behind closed doors, royal estate managers understood precisely what William had done. For over 2 decades, a complex network of civilian-adjacent trusts, private funds, and gray market financial vehicles had been quietly operating in the margins of the royal estate architecture. These mechanisms had been constructed so gradually that they went entirely unnoticed by outside auditors, routing subtle financial advantages and asset management privileges directly toward Camilla's family and her immediate circle. William didn't audit these funds, nor did he request a committee review. He simply defunded them overnight. By pulling £500 million out of those specific commercial structures, he collapsed the liquidity supporting Camilla's private financial arrangements. Senior advisors warned him that Clarence House would view this as an open declaration of war against the king's wife. William's response was ice cold. The Duchy of Cornwall exists to serve the direct line of succession and the British public, not private civilian interests operating in the shadows. By the time Camilla's financial managers realized their shadow network had been dismantled, William was already moving to the second, far more dangerous phase of his plan, addressing a 26-year-old lie that had haunted him since he was a teenager. The bitter core of this confrontation was forged in the year 2000. William was 17 years old, navigating the crushing, suffocating grief of losing his mother 3 years earlier. During a review of family photographs, the young prince spotted his mother wearing the black diamond pendant and the sapphire bracelet. Recognizing them as deeply personal items that held immense emotional value, he asked where they were being kept. The adults in the room handled the 17-year-old with calculated gentleness. He was assured that the pieces were safe, that they were being held in a secure, private repository at Highgrove, and that they would be preserved exclusively for him and his future family. It was a total fabrication. The jewelry was deliberately placed inside a Highgrove vault without being logged into the official Crown Estate registry. By keeping them out of the formal inventory, these priceless artifacts existed in a deliberate administrative shadow. They were not listed, not cataloged, and not legally tracked. For 26 years, they remained completely invisible, allowing those with access to the Highgrove estate to treat the vault not as a sacred royal trust, but as a private, unmonitored repository. When the Sotheby's image surfaced in 2026, the truth hit William with absolute clarity. The promise made to him as a grieving teenager had been broken. The items hadn't been misplaced or forgotten. They were being systematically prepared for private liquidation under the cover of a civilian name. But the boy who had been pacified in the year 2000 was now the Prince of Wales, the commander of the Duchy of Cornwall, and the heir apparent to the British throne. And he possessed the legal authority to dismantle anyone who stood in his way. Instead of issuing a public statement or engaging in administrative back and forth, William drove to Sandringham himself. He didn't send an envoy. He walked into the estate carrying a single, heavy leather binder. Staff members present on the periphery of the estate that day described an atmosphere of absolute, suffocating stillness. Inside that binder was a terrifying legal instrument prepared by Ferrer and Company, a draft letters patent for asset reclassification, grounded in constitutional precedent. The document laid out a brutal, unambiguous framework. It stated that if the reigning monarch failed to protect historical crown assets due to compromised executive management or private conflicts of interest, the heir apparent held the legal standing to petition the Privy Council directly. The threat embedded in that document was seismic. Petitioning the Privy Council under those specific conditions would effectively initiate a constitutional mechanism positioning William as Prince Regent over the Crown's private property, stripping King Charles of his executive authority over those assets, and forcing a public constitutional review of the monarchy's estate management. William placed the binder on the table in front of his father. He offered no dramatic speeches and displayed no visible anger. He simply gave the king two choices. First, Charles could immediately sign an executive royal decree reclassifying every piece of Princess Diana's jewelry as crown property held exclusively for the direct line of succession, completely outside the reach of Queen Camilla, her children, and her estate. Second, if he refused, William would file the letters patent with the Privy Council before the end of the week, turning the management of the royal vaults into a matter of formal, public constitutional record. It was an undeniable legal checkmate. King Charles was faced with a choice between protecting his wife's civilian daughter or preserving the executive authority of his own reign. The king picked up the pen and signed the decree. With a single stroke of ink, Diana's legacy was legally insulated from Camilla's circle forever. But for William, a royal signature was merely the legal authorization he needed to unleash the full force of the British judicial system. Within hours of the king signing the decree, Ferrer and Company filed an emergency application with the High Court. They didn't seek a civil summons. They requested a Mareva injunction, the most aggressive, unforgiving financial weapon available under British law. A Mareva injunction does not negotiate. It does not issue polite warnings. It instantly freezes all assets, accounts, and financial structures associated with the named individual to prevent the dissipation of property. Notifications were broadcast directly to Barclays, Coutts, and every major banking network in London. Instantly, every private bank account, investment trust, and liquid asset tied to Laura Lopes was frozen solid. She was legally paralyzed, unable to move money, transfer funds, or access private holdings. Then came the physical enforcement. At 5:30 in the morning on May 24th, High Court enforcement officers and legal agents executed the search warrant at Laura Lopes's Wiltshire property. The estate was systematically searched, documented, and audited. The black diamond pendant and the sapphire bracelet were located, verified against historical photographs, logged into federal evidence, and officially seized. Simultaneously, William's legal team obtained ironclad confidentiality orders from the High Court, placing a strict legal gag on the immediate specifics of the search. While international financial publications like Bloomberg and the Wall Street Journal began detecting massive, unusual account freezes tied to elite British figures, the legal wall erected by Kensington Palace ensured that Camilla's team could not use the media to control the narrative. When Camilla's personal legal representatives frantically attempted to invoke sovereign immunity to shield her daughter, the High Court flatly rejected the argument. Sovereign immunity applies exclusively to the reigning monarch and, in limited contexts, the Queen Consort. It offers zero legal protection to civilian relatives holding disputed property. Under the legal framework William had built, Laura Lopes was treated not as a protected member of the royal family, but as a private citizen in possession of misappropriated crown assets. For over 20 years, Queen Camilla's greatest asset had not been her title or her royal status. It had been her masterclass in quiet press management. Ever since the 90s, she had carefully cultivated relationships with senior editors, media executives, and royal correspondents across the British press. She understood how to leak subtle details, shape public perception, and gently neutralize stories that threatened her standing. On the morning of the Wiltshire raid, William stripped that weapon from her hand entirely. Activating emergency institutional protocols, William placed the Buckingham Palace press office under total communication lockdown. A strict directive was issued: no background briefings, no off-the-record comments, no informal chats with sympathetic journalists, and no public statements could be issued regarding the asset freeze without explicit written authorization from Kensington Palace. Camilla's team found themselves completely isolated. The media network she had spent 2 decades building was suddenly rendered useless by High Court injunctions and Kensington Palace gag orders. Her advisors were trapped in frantic, dead-end meetings, unable to release a denial, unable to brief the press, and unable to leverage the media machinery that had protected them for decades. Facing absolute legal and financial ruin, Laura Lopes surrendered. She signed a formal High Court consent order relinquishing every claim to the black diamond pendant and the sapphire bracelet, agreeing to their permanent transfer into the direct line of succession in exchange for the unfreezing of her basic administrative accounts. She quietly withdrew from public view, completely erased from the narrative. On June 14th, Prince William issued a formal, measured statement announcing the creation of the Diana Heritage Trust. The legal architecture of the trust was designed to be absolute. Every piece of Princess Diana's personal property, jewelry, and historical artifacts was placed into an ironclad trust designated exclusively for Catherine, Princess of Wales, and ultimately Princess Charlotte. No other household, no collateral family line, and no private civilian estate could ever touch those items again. William had won a total, devastating victory. He had reclaimed the jewelry, shut down the shadow trusts, and forced the king to yield. But as the High Court forensic team finalized their audit of the Highgrove repository, they stumbled upon a classified document that changed the scope of this war entirely. The High Court audit was intended to close the case. Instead, it unsealed a nightmare. A classified forensic file leaked from the Ministry of Justice revealed that the black diamond pendant and the sapphire bracelet were not the only items missing from the original Highgrove vault. Historical records proved that the repository had originally held 14 distinct, highly valuable artifacts belonging to Princess Diana. William's legal team had recovered 2. 12 pieces were still missing. When forensic accountants tracked the paper trail behind the missing 12 items, they discovered a sophisticated, multi-layered offshore operation. The remaining 12 artifacts had not been sold at auction, nor were they sitting in a British bank vault. They had been systematically transferred through a chain of international shell corporations, ultimately landing inside an anonymous private holding company registered in the state of Delaware. The choice of Delaware was a masterclass in legal evasion. Delaware's corporate privacy laws create a nearly impenetrable shield around beneficial ownership, placing those assets completely outside the jurisdiction of the British High Court. A Mariva injunction issued in London has zero legal force against a Delaware shell company, rendering Ferrer and Company completely powerless to execute search warrants or freeze those offshore structures. Most chillingly, the leaked Ministry of Justice file noted a specific internal classification code attached to the offshore paper trail, the Montecito connection. The implication sent immediate shockwaves through the highest levels of Kensington Palace. The paper trail didn't point to Camilla's circle in London, it pointed across the Atlantic, toward the exiled royal faction residing in California. It suggested that while Camilla's circle had held on to 2 pieces locally, a far more sophisticated, international operation had quietly secured the remaining 12 items, locking them away in American offshore structures where the British Crown could never touch them. Prince Harry and Meghan Markle possessed both the international legal access and the personal motivation to secure pieces of Diana's legacy beyond the reach of the official royal estate. By holding those 12 priceless artifacts inside a Delaware private entity, the Montecito faction held ultimate, unshakable leverage over the future of the royal family's historical heritage. Prince William had mobilized the full power of the British legal system, confronted his father, paralyzed his stepmother's family, and established an ironclad trust to protect his mother's memory. He had secured the future, enforced absolute authority over the crown's assets, and proved to the world that he commands the monarchy with an iron fist. Yet as he stands as the undisputed power behind the throne,